The new Inside Infinite blog is here, and there's a lot to go over. We've got insight into the design process of Halo Infinite's AI. We've got insight into the design behind how they behave and react during gameplay. And of course, much more that involves the UI, accessibility, the user experience, and so on. I first want to direct your attention to Gimme, which is a platform where us content creators can do short, bite-sized reviews of things that interest us. I tested the waters a little while ago with a review of Sonic Generations, a personal favorite game of mine, and now my Halo Combat Evolved overview is up. Feel free to give it a look and let me know what you think as well as any feedback you have about the platform. The link will be down below. And now, let's get started. The blog opens with an interview from the character team, the people responsible for the entities and combat loops we're going to be engaging with in the Halo Infinite campaign. The first question they're asked is, what are the pillars for the character team? Steve Dyke, Infinite's character and combat director, responds, the first pillar is creating compelling AI combatants. Each AI needs to be unique and have a clearly defined reason for existing within the sandbox. It doesn't just stop there though, because within each enemy role that's created are also sub-roles of that role, if that makes sense. Sort of how you have the Grunt as a base creature, and then you have Grunt Miners, Grunt Mules, Grunt Ultras, and so on. The team also talked early on about embracing the sci-fi aspects of Halo's universe when they began production. Halo is unique in that it's not like other shooters where you're just shooting soldiers in brown uniforms. These are alien creatures with exaggerated and crazy proportions. They wanted to use that advantage to craft really fun and interesting enemies to fight against. The second pillar for the team was player comprehension. It's important for a player to be able to tell who they're fighting in a battle, and tell who does what, and who are the primary targets. This is done via a combo of art, animation, design choices, and behaviors. Feedback for the player is also important. The exaggeration of an enemy stumbling after being hit, the angry insults they lob at you when low on health. They contextually help the player get a better read on who they're fighting and how their tactics are working against the enemy. The team is then asked, how did they use Halo Infinite's spiritual reboot to inform the enemy AI we're going to be fighting against? How did they stay true to these characters' spirits while updating them for Halo Infinite? Brian Repka, Infinite's character art lead, chimes in. A lot of the artistic changes in Halo Infinite and the spiritual reboot aspect not only helped the units look a bit more Halo-y than they did in Halo 4 and 5, it also helped them stand out better in combat, which actually helped gameplay. With the reintroduction of the brutes into the combat loop, it was important that the elites got away from that chunky and bulky look that they had in Halos 4 and 5, so they designed the elites to look like they could move fast, be very agile, and react intelligently to the player, versus a brute who looks kind of big and lumbering. The team is pretty proud of how the new elites turned out, and to be honest, so am I. This. Oh yeah, baby. This is the stuff. A new question is asked. So, the return of the brutes presented an issue. Since their role was arguably never well defined in Halo, each game that sported the brutes kind of had them in a completely different combat role. So with Halo Infinite, what new challenges did their return present to the team? Steve says that the team were actually energized about the brutes and how they could update them. They wanted the brutes to not feel like dumb monkeys, but rather these aggressive and visceral alien creatures. They spent a lot of time on their body language and voiceovers, and even felt that they were a great juxtaposition from the elite. Elites may recognize when they're at a disadvantage and peel off from combat to seek cover, while a brute may actually lose its temper. The idea of the brutes is that by the time you kill one, most of its armor will have been shot off since they're always so out in the open and care so little about self-preservation because they're just so angry and in the moment. Juan Carlos, the animation lead, goes on to explain that brutes have this commanding and arresting presence on the battlefield. Their bodies are huge, and you get a sense based off of their body language that they have a lot of pent-up anger. And occasionally, they'll get whatever the angry equivalent of the zoomies are. It gives the animators a lot of different ways to explore their physicality, how they carry themselves, and the kind of weapons that they do use. Brutes are kind of explosive in their temper, and it's apparently a ton of fun animating that. The team is of course asked a pretty important question: how's Craig doing? Steve says that the team has this love-hate relationship with Craig. While the memes are indeed hilarious, he unfortunately was the poster child for work that was not quite ready to show off yet. The brutes were still very much a work in progress, and thanks to the extra year that the Halo Infinite team got and the community's direct feedback, The look of the brutes are in a place that the art team is really proud of. They did, though, tell folks not to fear. Craig's spirit will live on in Halo Infinite if we look hard enough. Brian Repka then says that Craig is doing pretty well for himself. He's got a new hobby, he's been glammed up quite a bit, he's making new brute friends, and he's in a pretty good place in his life. Moving on from that, they're asked, how does a character get made? Does gameplay drive character creation, or does a cool character concept drive gameplay? Steve says that first and foremost, it's all about the gameplay. They look through their menagerie of aliens for a role that either doesn't exist in combat or does exist but maybe is underrepresented. They then try to think about what could be fun for the player to fight against in gameplay, which they call the special sauce of the enemy. Once they feel they've landed on a good idea, they come up with some rough sketches and throw together a pretty rough gameplay prototype to try to see if they can find a silhouette and maybe an early combat loop for the enemy. If the enemy is fun to fight, they're going to move on. They're going to create proper concept art for it. They're going to start making a proper model. They're going to get audio involved, animation involved, textures, etc., and give this new enemy proper production value. Turn it into a character for the game. But if the prototype is just really not that fun to fight, they cut this bad idea while it's still young and return to the drawing board. They're then asked how the AI are different in Halo Infinite versus past Halo games. Steve answers that since Halo Infinite is essentially trying to return to the more sandbox-driven gameplay of the original Halo titles, but expand on it, this new sandbox focus needed to be taken into consideration for the enemies. Much of the AI logic from Halo 4 and 5 was gutted and rebuilt to make the enemies more proactive and engage in the world around them. Hunters are going to deflect player attempts to grapple onto them, while brutes may pick up items in the world, such as fusion coils or even grunts, and throw them at the player. The smarter banished units will even make attempts to upgrade their own weapon arsenal, running to an ammo cache and grabbing a better gun off of it to use against the player. They've also spent a lot of time tuning the behavior systems of the AI thanks to the fact that the player could potentially be surrounded at any point due to the more open-ended nature of the campaign. They want to make sure that original Halo trilogy classic spirit of the player being aggressive and on the offensive is maintained and drift away from the more long-range cover shootery approach that the series began to drift in. They're then asked a new question for potential new Halo fans. Why are the colors, armor, and weapons of an enemy important from a gameplay standpoint? Steve says that Halo may be 20 years old, but the color-coordinated nature of its enemy ranks is an idea that stands tall against the passage of time. Steve remembers the way that the Gold Elite stood out in combat in the first Halo game due to their color, and that's a legacy element they're eager to get Halo back into. If you remember, Halo 4 and definitely Halo 5 drifted more towards these muted and sort of muddy colors that got lost in the intricate detail of the weapons and armor, and it genuinely got hard to tell units and ranks apart from each other. For Halo Infinite, they want you to be able to see an enemy at long range and in a split second recognize the silhouette of the enemy, what rank they are, and what weapon they're carrying. It helps the player make tactical decisions in combat and helps give Halo a variety of colorful and creative designs for its enemy roster. Brian then adds that enemy models were designed to be very modular so that armor pieces could be quickly mixed and matched to create a lot of visual variance within the roles. So the brute miner role may exist and its silhouette will roughly look the same, but you're going to notice minor differences in the brute armor just for visual flavor. Not all brute miners are going to look exactly the same. They also didn't want the color red to drown out the color spectrum, since color is so important to Halo gameplay. They wanted to have blue elites and yellow grunts running around Halo, but they also wanted to make sure that they give important units the banished red and silver look, such as the Grunt Mule. Seeing as this little boy here carries the brute's weapons into battle for them, it kind of made sense that this little guy was designed to almost look like a banished mascot of sorts. The team is then asked what inspired the Spartan Killers, how they came to be. Steve says that the Spartan Killers began life as an idea about a banished task force that were specifically trained to go toe-to-toe with Spartans and win. As goofy as it sounds, the A-Team was actually brought up a lot, especially due to the black and red color scheme. Brian then says that each Spartan killer is its own named individual within the story, with unique armor and their own trophies and stories about how they got those trophies that we're going to discover for ourselves in the campaign. They're asked what new species we're going to encounter in Halo Infinite. Steve says that there's going to be a lot of new variants of existing enemies, but there's also going to be a couple of new enemies as well. One of the new enemies they've shown off is the Skimmer. They're pretty much alongside the Jackal in terms of combat tier and importance, and despite hovering, they're not a proper flying enemy. You're not going to see them zipping around the sky. Now with a mouse, flying enemies are really easy to fight, all you do is point and click. But for a controller, flying enemies that move too quickly and are too small can actually sometimes be a problem and disorient players. Nick Avalone, a senior animator, actually says that the engine for Halo Infinite treats skimmers as ground enemies, so they'll always stay consistently hovering above the ground. It was just a matter of making that hovering look convincing from an animation department. It was tough to nail the body language and convey the weight of these little critters as they zoomed around the battlefield. He's overall pretty happy with the end product, and he's excited to see what we think of the skimmers and how they interact with vehicles. He then makes a joke about hiding the reference videos he made for the animation team. If you guys have ever seen animation reference videos, they can be very goofy. It's funny seeing these grown adults throwing themselves around a room, pretending to be an alien or a zombie. And then, before they go, they're asked about their favorite characters in Halo Infinite and why they chose them. And what's kind of funny is, across the board, it was all about the grunts. Their goofy proportions and humor made them a lot of fun to work on, but Steve and Nick had different answers. Steve is a big fan of the Brute Captain, thanks in no small part to his aesthetic and jetpack, and Nick is a fan of the Jackals. He thinks their broken English taunts and chicken-like squawks when you shoot them are pretty funny. The UX and UI teams are then brought in to answer questions about the Halo universe, what it's like to make HUDs, user interfaces, and tie the universe together under a suite of menus, options, and tools. Their first question is, what are the design pillars for the UX and UI team? The work that they do can't just be serviceable. It needs to look and feel premium. It needs to be polished. The menu needs to look like it meets community expectations. Chad Mearshak, Infinite's UI art lead, says that they wanted to infuse both modern and legacy elements together, and is able to have enough Halo DNA in it that it's recognizable as a Halo menu, but different enough that it can hopefully stand up there as one of the great Halo UIs that us in the community love. The team is then asked what the challenges were when designing and changing the legacy UI of Halo. What informed many of the choices made? Vincent answers, saying in this game they wanted to mute and tone down some of the front-end menu stuff a bit to showcase the world around the player. An example they gave is getting rid of the helmet borders from Halo 4 and 5 that cramped up the screen and moving the UI elements from the top of the screen next to the health bar to the bottom. He says that this was done so that players aren't checking all four corners of their screen at any given time, which I found a bit interesting since it took more eye movements at any given time during combat to see what my health and ammo situation was, whereas the classic HUD took just one eye movement, looking up near my health bar and seeing all the information neatly organized up there above the enemy's head. Chad then says that they wanted to innovate where possible, but not change for the sake of change, and while the UI elements may just be one aspect of Halo's menu, Eric D's realization lead says that preserving the legacy of the series while trying to update it for a modern audience is pretty hard to do, and he compares it a bit to walking on a tightrope over a hungry gravemind. Perfect balance must be struck, because if you lean in one direction too far, well, you get the picture. Omar Jonas, senior visual designer, says that the HUD of Halo is pretty signature and recognizable, defined by the blue wireframes around the health, weapons, and shields. The fonts may be different. The actual layout and structure of Infinite's HUD may be different, but the goal was for it to still be unmistakably a Halo HUD. The team is asked if there are specific HUD considerations between campaign and multiplayer. Casey Donaldson, a senior UX supervisor, answers first, saying that the multiplayer and campaign need HUD for different reasons. Campaign is more narrative focused, so the HUD elements can be spread apart a little bit more and can sometimes even be used to present narrative information during situations of downtime. Multiplayer, on the other hand, requires information to be extremely fast, snappy, and easy to grasp in one quick glance. What's hard about designing multiplayer HUDs is sometimes they're forced to make compromises during development and settle with what works but isn't perfect. And he then goes on to encourage the community to keep giving feedback about the HUD. The team wants our suggestions on how the HUD can be tailored and customized to fit our playstyles. Don't shut down discussions when it comes to HUD customization. He ends his answer by saying, again, they're planning to bring more player customization to the HUD, and that those left a bit unsatisfied with Infinite's HUD, such as myself, should keep giving feedback and stay tuned. They got stuff in the pipeline. The team is then asked about something they've been working on for a while, a design language across all of Halo Infinite's UI elements called Visor OS. What is the Visor operating system? Now, I'm actually going to interject here and say this is really interesting to me, and probably one of the coolest artistic choices of Halo Infinite. So Chad comes in and explains that he and his friend and colleague, Naphtali, sat down and came up with a modern ammo display for the assault rifle. They wanted something that does follow a lot of modern design trends, but make sure to keep its foot firmly planted in its original incarnation. Once they found a good look for the assault rifle's ammo counter, they moved on to the Commando, then the battle rifle, then the Hydra, then the Warthog's in-vehicle dashboard, and they noticed they were spreading that assault rifle ammo counter aesthetic to other areas of the game unintentionally. Then they stopped and came up with an idea. Why not take the ammo counter's look and make it an in-universe operating system that UNSC technology uses? Both Eric and Omar then joined in, and the new Visor operating system was then created and spread across the UI of Halo Infinite. Eric shows the artistic idea behind how the Visor operating system works in terms of colors. So blue is essentially the operating system on the front end, your nice, clean, produced look, while neon green, that sort of 1980s aliens look, is the under-the-hood code of the operating system. Omar walks us through how when he joined the project in September of last year, he saw the early version of this Visor operating system, and he felt inspired to spread it to other UI elements. Make it not just an aspect of the weapon's designs, but also spread it to the user interfaces, and make all of this feel kind of like an in-world user interface that the Chief himself is accessing from his suit. They were asked some questions about the design process of the TAC map, your kind of Breath of the Wild map that you can look at, and they said what was pretty challenging was striking a balance between information and presentation. If they added too much detail and made the map look too cool, then the map could unintentionally obscure and make UI elements hard to see or read. They constantly made small tweaks to the lighting, colors, level of detail, and the such, and wanted this thing to feel like it was actually an immersive part of the Chief's suit, and by extension, the new Visor operating system that UNSC technology uses in Halo Infinite. Remember how Skybox Labs joined Halo Infinite's development a while ago? Apparently, they actually helped bring the TAC map to life, which is pretty cool. Moving on from the Visor operating system, the team is asked about the presentation and philosophy behind player customization in multiplayer. Roxy Garza, a senior creative technologist, recalls the extreme task of working with the live team to bring the customization system to life. It was this collaborative effort between Garza, the live and services team, lighting and environment artists, character and technical artists, UX members for polishing and bug fixing, and much more. Halo 5's customization system and UI was quite a messy and disorganized affair, and it was important that the team added things such as favoriting, filters, sorting options, and the such. As Halo Infinite is continually updated, the UI will see more features added, and the elements will be redesigned as the game grows. Eric says that he hopes Halo Infinite's customization system is seen as a love letter to fans who have been wanting an evolution of Reach's customization system. He then recounts the extreme stress that the team was under when they were all forced to work from home when the pandemic started. And then, he and Chad walk us down memory lane, showing and talking about the process of bringing to life the customization screen we're going to be seeing in the final game. It's worth reading for yourself. It's super interesting and unfortunately quite hard to condense. The group then goes on to talk about some cool details we may have noticed since last year's Halo Infinite demo. A lot of weapons have seen small decals, bits of text, and world-building elements applied to them. They aren't literally UI elements, but they are aesthetic, and they're bits of text that will ground the technology we use within the world of Halo. They collaborated with the narrative team as well as many other artists and designers to get these little decals and stickers fleshed out and applied to the weapons. They even revisited old logos introduced in Halo 4 and 5 and redesigned them to make them more streamlined and cleaner looking, such as the Hannibal Weapon Systems logo seen here. Chad says that not only do these little decals and stickers ground the weapons and make them feel manufactured within the Halo universe, these logos are also designed to artistically embody the personality of the weapons they're applied to. He then begs Xbox Consumer Products to maybe talk to him about getting some of these decals on t-shirts. Could you imagine a shirt that is branded in official Halo Assault Rifle decals? That would be pretty cool. UI and UX are then asked about accessibility and modularity for users. What are the key features the teams are proud of? And if there's going to be continued work to improve things post-launch? The team is overall happy with the amount of options for colorblind folks that Halo Infinite provides, as well as the scalability of the more cinematic effects that exist for presentation's sake, such as screen shake, bloom, etc. But there are a ton of features the team is working on. They scour the forums for requests, suggestions, and actually encourage people to discuss things such as toggles and other options, since it helps make the game more approachable and accessible to people. One of the biggest areas of improvement are more options for the glowing outlines around players, as well as HUD customization options, and they're excited to keep on rolling out new features and improving Halo Infinite's experience as time goes on. The team is then asked to give closing thoughts to the community, and pretty universally, the team thanks the community for being so open to these humanizing interviews that help the team feel more like people within the community. They say that our feedback and suggestions power their creative process and give them new things to work on and ideas to pursue. Halo Infinite is almost here, and while they're very happy with the game, they're even more excited about what's to come and seeing how the community feedback grows the game over the years. All feedback is welcome and encouraged, and the devs are happy to take it in. The blog then ends with some behind-the-scenes coworker silliness, the story on why Chief loads up a bunch of Marines into his Warthog and drives them off a cliff, then some fun gameplay stories from Joe Staten about the banished base we see Chief assault in the overview video. Something interesting is that this banished base doesn't necessarily need to end in fireworks. It can also be done a bit stealthily, and that's about it. It was a lot to go over, and I appreciate all of your patience. It may take me a few days to report on Halo news, but the fact you're all here for it anyways always makes the extra time worth it. The Inside Infinite blog will, of course, be linked down below, and if you enjoyed the video, consider sharing, subscribing, and a huge thank you to the members of Late Night Gaming. The mere fact that there are people like this in my community who support the channel gives me the drive to keep on keeping on. You're all sensational. Now, if you don't mind me, I think I'm gonna get to work on my next video.